You really think this firm would exist without me? He said it loud enough for the whole conference room to hear, loud enough for the junior associates by the door, for the clients we'd spent 6 months courting, for the two partners who'd flown in from Chicago. He smiled when he said it, like it was a joke, like I was the joke. I smiled back, set my portfolio on the table, said, "Let's not keep the Hargrove team waiting." And I sat down and presented the best work of my career. But I kept that smile filed away, somewhere cold and very, very organized. My name is Ivy. I am 41 years old. I have a master's degree in architecture from Cornell, 12 years of licensed practice, and a scar on my left palm from the night my husband and I stayed up until 3 a.m. cutting foam models for the pitch that won us our first major contract. We were two people and a dream back then. We split the paper cuts and the ramen and the terror of being nobody. I thought we were building something together. What we were actually building was his career. I just didn't have the paperwork to prove it yet. His name was Miles. We met in grad school. He was charming in that specific way that architecture men can be charming. Big opinions about light and materiality, the kind of confidence that reads as vision until you've lived with it long enough to see the seams. I was 26 and I thought his certainty was the thing I was missing. It took me a decade to understand that certainty without accountability is just arrogance, with good posture. We married at 30. We co-founded Callaway Strand Design at 32, which was technically named after both our middle names. My middle name is Callaway, a family name from my grandmother's side, though he handled most of the client dinners early on because, as he put it, I was better behind the scenes. I accepted that. I poured everything into the work itself. The concepts, the drawings, the site visits, the long negotiations with contractors, the presentations I wrote, and he often delivered. Our firm won the Meridian Office Complex contract when I was 35. The design was mine. The model I built by hand over a weekend when our rendering software crashed. He stood at the podium and accepted the regional award. I stood in the third row and clapped. I told myself it was a partnership. I told myself that was how it worked. My friend Constance was the first person who said out loud what I'd been thinking at 2 a.m. for years. She'd been my closest friend since undergrad, one of those people who has known you long enough to say the thing you won't say to yourself. She was a contracts attorney. I mention that because it matters later. "You know what your problem is?" she said one night over dinner, about 8 months before everything fell apart. "You keep signing things with your hands and letting him sign things with his name." I laughed. I told her she was being dramatic. She was not being dramatic. The conference room incident, the "this firm would exist without me" comment, was not the first time. It was just the first time he'd done it in front of clients. Usually it was smaller. A meeting where he'd present my concept and say "I" instead of "we." A phone call with the developer where he described my site analysis as research my team pulled together. An industry dinner where he introduced me as his wife before he introduced me as his partner. And the order of those two things told the whole story. I noticed every single one. I filed them away the way you file things you're not ready to act on yet. The Hargrove pitch was different because of who was in the room. The Hargrove Group was the largest private development client in our region, a $40 million mixed-use project that would define the next 5 years of any firm that won it. I had spent 4 months on the concept, 4 months of Saturdays, 4 months of waking up at 5 a.m. with thoughts about pedestrian flow and material transitions. When Miles said what he said, Jonathan Hargrove was sitting directly across from me. I watched his expression. He was too professional to react, but I saw him glance at me, then at Miles, then back at his hands. After the presentation, Jonathan walked me to the elevator. Miles was still in the conference room glad-handing. Jonathan said, quietly, "That was your design, wasn't it? The whole thing?" I said, "Miles and I work closely on everything." He nodded slowly. "Of course." He pressed the elevator button. "My mother was an architect. People used to say the same kinds of things about her work." The elevator opened. He stepped back. I stepped in. I went home and sat in my car in the driveway for a long time. That night, I called Constance. I want to be honest about what happened next because I think people sometimes tell these stories like the decision was easy. Like there's one moment of clarity and then everything moves in a clean, straight line. That's not how it was for me. It took me 3 months. 3 months of sitting with it, of going back and forth, of trying to find a version of the story where I was wrong about what was happening. I loved him once. I had built 11 years of my adult life alongside this person. The idea of dismantling that, not just the marriage, but the firm, the shared email signatures, the joint voicemail greeting, the bookshelf where our architecture school diplomas hung next to each other, it felt like a kind of demolition I wasn't sure I had the tools for. But I also knew what I knew. So I started quietly, the way you start things when you know you only get one chance. First, I called Constance and told her everything. Not the careful edited version I'd been telling her for years. Everything. She listened for 2 hours and said very little except, "Keep going," and "aha," and occasionally, "that son of a bitch." At the end, she said, "Okay, here's what you do." What Constance told me was this: in a professional partnership dispute, documentation is everything, not feelings, not history, not the foam models you cut your hand on. Paper, what is written, signed, filed, time-stamped, who owns what, and can you prove it? I spent the next 6 weeks going through everything. Every email I had ever sent with a concept attached, every design file time-stamped in my name, every contractor communication where my email was the originating address, every invoice our firm had sent, cross-referenced against the projects I had designed. I organized it into a folder on a personal hard drive that I kept at Constance's apartment. I also, on Constance's advice, quietly consulted with an intellectual property attorney named Mr. Reeves. He was 60-something, soft-spoken, and had the energy of a man who had seen everything and was no longer capable of being surprised by any of it. He reviewed my documentation and told me I had a very strong claim to co-authorship, and in some cases sole authorship, on roughly 70% of the firm's major projects. "Your name is on the founding documents," he said, "but not on the attribution for several award submissions. That's a problem for him, not for you." I asked him what I should do next. He said, "Whatever you decide to do it before the Hargrove contract is signed." I went home and looked at Miles across the dinner table. He was on his phone. He didn't look up. I thought about Constance, about Mr. Reeves, about Jonathan Hargrove in the elevator, about my grandmother, whose name I carried in the middle of my own. I thought about the conference room, the smile. Then I made my plan. Here's what most people don't understand about leaving a situation like this. The leaving is not the hard part. The hard part is the before. The documentation, the legal consultations, the finding of a separate bank account, the quiet move of personal files, the careful reading of every partnership agreement you ever signed. The leaving itself, when it comes, takes about 40 minutes. I did not leave dramatically. I did not throw things or send an email to the whole firm or make a scene at a client dinner. I scheduled a meeting. It was a Tuesday morning in October. I had already spoken to 3 of our 6 senior staff members individually, told them what I was doing, and given them the option to stay with the firm or come with me. All 3 said they'd come with me. I found out later that a 4th one made the same decision within 2 weeks. I sat down across from Miles in his office, our office, and I put a folder on the desk. He looked at it. "What is this?" "A dissolution proposal," I said. "I've had it reviewed. It's fair." He laughed. He actually laughed. "You're not serious?" "The proposal gives you the firm name and current client contracts except for Hargrove. It gives me my design portfolio documentation, IP rights on the work I can demonstrate sole authorship on, and a buyout of my equity stake." He stopped laughing. "Hargrove hasn't signed yet," he said. I know. Jonathan Hargrove reached out to me last week. He would like the project to proceed under my direction. He asked me to submit a revised LOI under a new entity by Friday. Miles stared at me. I watched him cycle through several expressions: disbelief, then anger, then something that looked almost like reassessment, like he was calculating something. You went behind my back. I responded to a client inquiry, I said, same as you've always done. He pushed the folder back across the desk. I'm not signing this. That's your right, I said, but I want you to know that Mr. Reeves and Constance are both available this week if you'd like to move through the formal process instead. It will be longer and more expensive, and the IP documentation will become part of the public record. The award submissions especially. Silence. He looked at the folder for a long time. Then he said, "You've been planning this." "Yes," I said, "for a while." He signed it 3 weeks later. I don't want to make it sound clean. It wasn't clean. There were nights in that 3-week interim where I sat in Constance's guest room. I had moved out quietly, told him I needed space, taken only what was mine, and I cried in a way I hadn't cried since my father died. Not because I wanted to go back. I didn't. But because grief doesn't care whether you made the right decision. Grief just shows up anyway and sits on the edge of the bed and waits. Constance brought me tea and didn't tell me it would be fine. She said, "You're allowed to be sad and still be right." I've thought about that sentence many times since. The night the dissolution agreement was finalized, I drove to my new office, a lease suite on the 14th floor of a building downtown, not far from the old firm, and I sat at my desk in the dark for a while. No furniture yet except the desk and one chair, which I'd bought myself. The city was lit up outside the windows. I'd always loved the way cities look at night from high floors. All those lit windows, all those people in them. I thought about the conference room, the smile, the way he'd said it loud enough for the room to hear. I thought about how I had smiled back and kept going. That, I realized, was the thing I'd been doing for 11 years. Keeping going, absorbing and adjusting and keeping going. It had cost me, but it had also built something in me, a very specific kind of patience and a very specific kind of discipline that I was now going to use for myself instead. The Hargrove project broke ground 14 months later. I attended the ceremony with my new firm's name on the signage, Callaway Design Studio, my grandmother's name, mine. Jonathan Hargrove shook my hand in front of the assembled city officials and press and said, "This is the firm I wanted from the beginning." He said it loud enough for people to hear. I think he knew what he was doing. Constance was there. She wore a yellow coat and cried a little, which she would deny if you asked her. She'd been my attorney on the dissolution and had also referred me to Mr. Peng Reeves, which I would find out only later was not an accident. She had known for 2 years that I would eventually need him and had kept his card ready. "You knew," I said to her at the reception afterward. "I hoped," she said. "There's a difference." There is a difference. I've been thinking about that too. The firm won its first industry award under my sole name 6 months after that. A regional honor. Nothing enormous, but the first one that had my name on the plaque and only my name. I put it on the wall next to the foam model from the Meridian pitch, the one I made by hand the weekend the software crashed. It had been in a box in my mother's garage for 3 years. I went and got it the week I signed my new office lease. My mother cried when I told her what I was doing, not from sadness. She said, "I always wondered when you were going to do this." She paused. "Your grandmother would have known that firm's name immediately." I get messages sometimes from women who've seen me speak at industry events or who found my firm through word of mouth, and they tell me versions of their own story: a partner who takes credit, a name left off the proposals, a joke made in a meeting that wasn't really a joke. I try to answer everyone. I don't have advice that works for everyone because every situation is different and every person has a different set of tools available to them and a different set of constraints. What I know is what worked for me. Document everything. Find the people in your life who will tell you the truth. Know what you own before someone else decides for you. And when you smile across a conference table at the person who just tried to make you small, really smile. Not because you've given up, because you already know what's in the folder. Miles runs a smaller firm now. I heard through mutual colleagues that he struggled for about a year after the split, lost two senior designers, had to renegotiate a contract. I don't spend much time thinking about it, not because I'm indifferent, exactly. More because indifference was something I had to build, deliberately, the way you build anything, patiently, with the right materials, over time. The Hargrove project was completed last spring. It won the AIA Regional Award for Commercial Design. My name is on that one too. I drove past the site last week on my way to a client meeting. Different client, different building, same city. I glanced at it through the passenger window. The way the light hits the facade in the late afternoon is exactly what I imagined when I was drawing it at 5 a.m. on a Saturday, before anyone knew my name, before any of this was settled. That's the thing about the work. It stays. Long after the meetings in the conference rooms and the signed agreements and the grief that sat on the edge of the bed, the buildings stay. And my name is on them now. That was always the plan. It just took me a while to make sure I could prove it. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Not the conference room, not the dissolution agreement. It's the drive home the night Jonathan Hargrove said, "That was you design, wasn't it?" I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time and didn't go inside. I just sat there with the engine off and thought about 11 years. All the 5 a.m. mornings, all the 5 a.m. mornings, all the foam models, all the times I'd made myself smaller so someone else could feel larger. And I thought, this is what it costs when you give your work away and call it partnership. I don't believe things happen to us for no reason, not in any mystical sense. I mean in the plain, observable sense that actions compound. Miles didn't lose the Hargrove project because the universe decided to balance some cosmic ledger. He lost it because he spent years building a reputation on work he didn't do, and reputations built on borrowed credibility are structurally unsound. They look fine until someone pulls the right thread. Jonathan Hargrove pulled it the moment he looked across that conference table and saw exactly who had actually done the work. What I had to learn, and it took me longer than I'd like to admit, is that integrity isn't just a moral position, it's a practical one. Every email I sent with a concept attached, every contractor I called, every site I visited at 7 a.m. in February, that was a record. A time-stamped, documented record of who built what. I didn't know I was building a legal case. I thought I was just doing my job. But doing your job honestly, thoroughly, with your name on the actual work, that turns out to matter enormously when it's time to prove what's yours. Constance knew that. She'd been watching me for years and waiting for me to see what she already saw. The intelligence she brought to that situation wasn't just legal knowledge. It was the clarity to look at a complicated emotional situation and ask, what is actually true here and what can be proven? That kind of thinking, the kind that separates what feels real from what is demonstrable, is something I try to bring to everything now. It's the difference between being right and being able to act on being right. And then there's the part that doesn't get talked about enough, the endurance of it. The 3 months of sitting with it before I decided. The 6 weeks of documentation. The 3 weeks between handing him the folder and watching him sign it. None of that was fast. None of it felt clean. There were nights in Constance's guest room when I wondered if I was making a catastrophic mistake. Resilience isn't the absence of doubt. It's continuing to move carefully and deliberately while the doubt is loud. My grandmother's name is on my firm. I didn't plan it that way at 32. I just thought it sounded right. But now it feels like something she handed me without knowing she was doing it. A name is a kind of promise. I spent a long time letting someone else make promises with mine. I won't do that again. The buildings stay. That part is true, and my name is on them now.